Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Ron from International Trade Council, so I'll be your moderator for today. And we have here our speaker, Mr. Ramakrishnan Heshagiri, and he is the managing director of Cyber Safe Haven Consulting. Um, we are waiting for other participants to log in. And while we are waiting, let me just do a quick housekeeping. So the platform we are using right now is very straightforward. On the right-hand part of your screen, you can see there the comment section. That's where you can type in your questions, and the questions will be entertained after the presentation. So this presentation will probably last more or less an hour, um, depending on the questions that we are receiving. So we are just waiting for other participants to log in. Maybe I can give them a few minutes to log in. And while we are waiting, let me just give you a brief introduction on what's the topic about. So the webinar is securing your business in 10 simple steps. And securing your business against all kinds of threats may seem overwhelming at first, and using a simple framework can make things easier, not just to understand, but to implement too. Whether you are a CTO, CIO, or lead product development or engineering for your company, you will learn about the security framework that will protect your intellectual property as well as other key assets. So the topic is very interesting. We have the PowerPoint presentation right now, and this webinar is recorded. So in case in the future you would like to go back and listen again for the webinar, you can check this out to our to ITC YouTube channel. So without any further ado, let me give the presentation back to Mr. Krishnan. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much, Ron. Really appreciate the kind introduction. So very good morning to all of you. As Ron had, briefly spoken about what this presentation is going to be, it's all about security, how to secure your business. And also, as he mentioned, the intent is to simplify it. People generally get overwhelmed when they talk about cybersecurity. So the intent is to keep it very simple, very straightforward, so that you can go back to your individual businesses and apply that and protect your assets. So that's the whole idea. So let's see how successful we are in this attempt. So we can go on to the next slide, please. Before we jump into the real meat and content of the presentation, a very quick background about myself. I've done a bunch of certifications in the security space myself. Worked in leading a security company, McAfee, for about 7.5 years. Building network security as well as web security products. Overall, I've been in the industry for about 25 years, mostly building software products, not necessarily security products, but in general software products. So I have seen both sides in terms of building as well as protecting, software products. So I have some fair experience on both sides, and also some nice certifications around advanced cybersecurity from Stanford, and also around program management. So the intent around the background was to say that, have done quite a few things around security, and you can be assured that, if you need any help, we'll definitely be able to take care of any kind of needs around cybersecurity. And so is my team, if not more qualified, at least definitely as qualified as mine. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So the framework, as the title suggested, talks about 10 steps. So we'll very quickly run through the 10 steps in terms of what they are. And each of the individual steps we'll talk a little more in detail as we move forward, right? So asset inventory. So the most important step would be to know what are you trying to protect, right? So trying to identify, make a list of all the assets your company has, and keeping it ready so that you are able to really confirm whether you are protecting those specific assets. Now, as we move forward, we'll look into what kind of assets could be there. But for now, let's keep it simple, saying that we need an asset inventory list. The second thing is about Not all assets require the same level of protection, and that's something that we have to agree, accept, acknowledge, and that would be the best way to protect our assets. An IP, or important patent related document that you have, is definitely not going to be the same as an internal list of some information that you have, but definitely it's not going to be the same value. So you have to segregate according to the value, and we'll look at ways by which we could potentially be doing that. The third one is about how to harden the systems. When we say systems, it could be your laptop, desktop, servers, and so on. So hardening is the process of keeping a tight control, so that that is one way by which you are able to protect people getting into the system, right? So for example, we'll talk about this more in detail, but just as a small snippet is like, if you have to have multiple logins to that machine, you really need to know whether and how many users are going to log in, and keep only those logins. You don't need to have like all the users the ability to log into that machine if it's not really necessary. So that's just one example. um, so, I wanted to do a quick check. I hope I'm not running too fast, and you are able to comprehend the pace. So please acknowledge, or please type in a comment in case, I'm running a little too fast. So I'll continue further. Moving on to the next point, which is around tightening the identity and access control. So here, what we're essentially talking about is how we are creating users in our system. So who has the roles, who can access what, that needs a centralized place where we are able to have a 360-degree view or a bird's eye view of all the people who can. It could be internal, it could be external, but there should be a centralized place where we are able to see all the users and what kind of access they have to. Fifth point is around how do we secure the email services or servers, whether we have in-house or we have a hosted solution from G Suite or from Microsoft M365, or it could be from Zoho. Whether it's a hosted solution or you have an in-house server, how do you secure that? Similarly, securing a network, fairly straightforward. If you have an internal network, it becomes more complex. But if you have an external network, if you have lots of people working from distributed places, remote locations, and then they are also accessing distributed resources, it becomes pretty complex. So we have various solutions for that. We'll talk about that as we move forward. And also we have to, in case you have in-house applications, how do you secure your applications? BAPT is the most common service that most security consulting companies will provide, and obviously we also provide that, and you need to know how to secure your applications during development, post deployment, everything. You need to know how secure your application is. So nowadays, there's a lot of talk about ransomware. So the easiest way to be quickly back from ransomware is if we have a good backup and recovery mechanism. So even let's say worst case, God forbid, you are hit by a ransomware. The first thing is you are stuck only if you do not have a backup. Let's say you're taking a daily backup of all your systems, whether it's an endpoint, whether it's your laptop, whether it's your server, whether it's your cloud servers, everything you are taking backups almost on a daily basis. And there are ways by which it has to be taken. So if you're not taking it on the same server, then everything is getting locked up. So you have to distribute it. So if you're doing the right things around backups, what you would end up doing is that you will be able to quickly recover even if you're hit by a ransomware. So these are some of the mitigation strategies, as well as not necessarily a defense or a protection strategy, but still it's a great mitigation strategy even if you're hit by a ransomware. Then we have to talk about continuous monitoring, right? All of us know that there are new kinds of threats, attacks happening every single day, if not every single hour, right? So unless we continuously monitor what's happening in our system, we would definitely not be coming to know whether our protection is sufficient, not sufficient. Is there a zero-day attack that's happening and somebody has penetrated a network, and what kind of defense will be required? So So continuous monitoring is something that is extremely critical. And last but not the least, we'll have to talk about awareness. So training sessions, having clear idea about what are the things that are going to help the organization. So that will be the awareness programs that are being conducted within the company. So next slide, please. Yep. So when we talk about the asset inventory, we had clearly said that we have to make a list of everything in the company, and the first thing that comes to everybody's mind is desktops, laptop servers, and now almost every company has a lot of cloud computing resources, whether it's a EC2 instance or Docker instances, so on and so forth. So these are the easy ones that we can immediately take care of. We can make a clear-cut list, and everybody will definitely remember that these are the ones. There will be some kind of, at least in Excel, where all this is maintained. And so if somebody comes like us, a security company comes to help you with your security, you would be able to provide this list. However, many companies, the place where they go wrong is the next step, which is identifying the other kind of assets. So Ron, if you could please click one more time. So there are other kind of assets which we typically will not come to our mind, which is around your phones, IP phones, not the mobile phones, the company asset, but there could be IP phones. There could be Ron, could you please click it one more time, please? I think there is. Yeah, thank you. So as I was explaining, there could be printers, there could be biometric devices, there could be handheld devices, IP phones. So these are the devices which typically will get left out and which will not be on the top of everybody's mind when they have to write or create an asset inventory. So you have to pay special attention, and you have to be very conscious about remembering that these also have IPs. So most of the printers that a reasonable, even 100 people sized organization will have, let's say, a Xerox printer, which is basically having an IP, and it is having a processor, and so by itself it's actually a machine, right? It's a Linux machine. It's running a Xerox operating system. Technically it's not Linux, it's a variant of the Unix, and therefore it's a machine by itself. And the easiest way people experienced hackers could get into confidential documents is just read the printer spool. They are able to access confidential documents. If they know the IP, they can just do traversal of the IPs and then find that there is a printer, and then they can read the spool if it is not protected sufficiently, and then they have access to confidential documents which potentially a CEO is about to sign tomorrow, and they have access to those agreements. So my whole point here is, when you are making an asset inventory, please do remember that anything that has an IP is potentially an asset, right? So think about all different kinds of devices. Your access control devices, when somebody is entering into your office, is there an access control device? Does it have an IP? Is it remotely controlled? Then definitely it should be considered as an asset. So that's the point about this slide. So move forward. So continuing further, when we talk about assets, again, another typical mistake that occurs is people think about hard assets, physical assets, but not about the information assets. So, a lot of time, energy has to be specifically spent around classifying the information assets, like company financial documents, your budgets, important agreements and contracts that have been signed, or there'll be other kinds of things also, like for example databases could be there. So if you could just click one more time. Yeah. So as I was saying, there could be company employee data which is internal. If not protected sufficiently, it could get exposed. And similarly, we could be having customer data, which is again highly valuable for competitors or hackers, and therefore highly vulnerable also. So information asset is the second biggest category which needs to be protected. So moving on, before we kind of step in, I just want to make a quick note about Kevin Metnick. I'm sure anybody over 40, 45, would have heard about Kevin Mitnick, very famous guy who had, broken into multiple large companies in the late 70s as well as in early 80s. Very notorious for doing all kinds of, very innovative methods of hacking and stealing data. So just to give you a quick, I'm sure you might not be able to read the small print. So I'll help you with that. So one of the things that happened in 1975 was what Kevin did was, he jumped into the trash cans of the offices where, he wanted to get steal confidential data or the local transport system. And then he would take the unused cards of the local transport, and then he would write back information into it, and then he used to commute for free. So either he will help companies with this data which was shredded, the papers which have been shredded but have not been shredded sufficiently, or just been put into the trash without shredding. This is like a gold mine. So he used to dump into the trash cans, get all kinds of information, and then further use that information to hack into the systems. So the whole concept of dumpster diving became very famous after Kevin started doing these very unorthodox ways of hacking into systems. So I just wanted to touch upon this because the value of information assets, if you're not protecting, if you're not giving sufficient importance to this particular category, then things can go south very, very quickly. And that is the reason I put this slide and wanted to talk about Kevin Mitnick's very unorthodox techniques. So we can move on to the next slide. So as we saw here, now we have a whole lot of assets that we are talking about. So we have hard assets, and then we are talking about different kinds of information assets. So how do we prioritize? Can we, as we said earlier, we are not going to be providing the same level of importance to all of these assets. It's not going to be like just bundled together and say that, oh, let's just protect all of these together. That's going to be very difficult, right? So how do we do that? So the first methodology would be trying to assign a value to each of the asset. For the hard assets like laptops, or for high value asset, let's say you have tokens, then it becomes easy to assign a value to that, to servers. You can do that very easily. That's not a problem. But what happens to information assets? So how do you put a value to the database, customer database? How do you put a value to the employee information that you hold? About the salaries, about the kind of the projects that people are working on. How do you put a value to that? So that becomes a little challenging. So that is where the second technique could potentially be helping, which is around trying to do it by criticality. So this is a qualitative mechanism where you try to categorize by saying that, okay, this is a low value item, this is a medium value item, and this is a high risk item, or high, So when you do that, so it becomes much easier when you cannot really put a number around any of these assets. And before you are probably thinking in this in your mind, can I use a combination of these two techniques? Absolutely. You should, and that is what would be most recommended, that you should, for certain things where you can put value, keep a list of that and try to see how you would want to secure those assets where it is easy to secure by value, and for the remaining things you can put by criticality, and then you know that which ones need more attention. So go to the next one, please. So we spoke about assets. Now let's talk about how to protect them, right? We have not spoken. So one of the things that we have so far done is trying to identify what are the assets, what are the critical assets. That's what we have done. Now, what are the methods or techniques by which we can potentially try to secure them a little bit more? So the first technique, this is a technique, it's not to be confused with a specific network term, but the idea is closely related to the network terminology also. So it's called segregation. So you segregate your high value assets or the critical assets from the low value assets. So even if a compromise happens, you're not going to lose everything at one shot. So just to give you an example, if you decide to store your data, customer data in a particular database, right? And it's in, or maybe that's a bad example. Let's say that you are having some confidential financial documents for your company, and that you're going to put it in a certain S3 bucket of AWS. Now, what you can also do is, if your computation servers are running on AWS, you can consider whether you want to put it in Google Drive, or you want to put it in Azure, or you want to put it somewhere else, maybe Dropbox. So that way you are diversifying, and it's not a single point of contact, a single point of failure is not happening. You're not losing all the data at once. You're trying to segregate the high value data. And whenever you're having high value data or critical data, you could also be adding more protection mechanisms to it, like second factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. That way, you are protecting your high value assets even closer, keeping it closer to your chest. So segregation is the first technique. The second technique, when we're talking about segregation, as I said, it's a networking, primarily it's a networking term. And, you could, if you have internal networks, very small startups and small businesses typically will not have. But if you are, let's say, a medium sized business, so let's say you're about 500 people organization, 250 to 500 people organization, you're very likely to have some kind of VLANs inside your, some kind of networks inside your company, where you're trying to segregate the information. And that's a very good technique, and that you should do. Now, even when you are having VLANs, you need to be very careful about what kind of VLANs. There is a technique called VLAN hopping, where people can move from one particular network and guess the second network and move from one to the other, and therefore you're still able to access confidential data. So you still have to make sure that the movement from one particular network to the other is blocked, and it is secured sufficiently. So these kind of segregation techniques are very important. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So now I had briefly touched upon hardened systems, and I did not dwell very specifically in terms of what I mean. And so I have a specific slide for that, a dedicated slide for that. So one of the first things that everybody talks about is patching the machine at all times, right? So there are critical updates happening to all kinds of systems, whether it's a Windows machine, Linux machine. So keeping the machine up to date with respect to patches and updates is the simplest and the easiest way to protect yourself. If there's a critical security vulnerability for Chrome or from Microsoft that's happening and you have come to know about it, please update immediately. This is the easiest thing to do. The second easiest low-hanging fruit is about anti-malware. So antivirus, there's tons of vendors available in the market. Choose the one which you feel is doing a great job. Cost, performance, whatever category, specifications that you have, as per that you can take a call in terms of which one you want to deploy for yourself, and then you can apply that particular anti-malware solution for your company. The third one is a little, not very popularly seen in blogs and other things, but I would strongly recommend this. So particularly to your laptops, for let's say VP of engineering, CTO, CIO, CXOs, the head of marketing, they will have very confidential information, and there are multiple levels of security that will be required. So again, this is very basic, very easy to implement. Having a BIOS password on the system is the first level of protection that can happen. The second level of protection that could also happen, and definitely recommended, is having some kind of encryption by default, which is like BitLocker on Windows machines you have. And all you need to do is just turn on the BitLocker, and it will encrypt the hard drive at rest. people have the tendency to turn it off, or do it only on certain circumstances. So you really have to look at your policy, what you really want to do. General recommendation would be to keep it on as much as possible. Only in very restricted and exceptional cases you might want to turn it off. Similarly, IT administrators, might not always have a very close watch on how many users are allowed to log into a particular system. Let's say you have an internal file server, not hosted on Google, not hosted on this one. Inside your campus, you have a server, and you want to share data within your company. Even if it is between distributed offices, in the head office you have a particular server where lots of critical design documents are available. Now, who can access this is a very important question, right? When I say access, as in physically log in or remotely log to that particular machine, they might be able to read certain data, which is fine, but they should not be able to log into the machine unless and otherwise it's absolutely necessary. Similarly, if you do not have RDP services, one service where you can remotely log into that particular machine. So RDP, if it is not required, please shut it down. So these kind of things are very easy and low-hanging fruits that are absolutely necessary to be taken care of. I mean, I think all of us know that disallowing external media like USB, which is not trusted, which is not sanitized, which is not cleaned, which is not an internal resource, absolutely should not be allowed. So I can move on to the next one. Yeah, so this is very, very important, this one. So I'll spend maybe like a couple of minutes. Identities and access control. Many organizations, what they typically do is they create users, and they are assigned permissions. Now it works great for 20 people organization. Um, Now, if you are not very conscious about how this process, how this ability to provide access to people is not controlled in the beginning, it can just go out of control very quickly, and then that will become a nightmare. So right from the beginning, what is very highly recommended practice is, rather than saying person A has access to all these financial records, what you would want to do is create roles. So even in finance, you might want to say that this particular person is meant for issuing checks or for making fund transfers. This person is responsible for making invoices. Now, when you do this, there are two things that you will be able to crack. One, you are able to segregate or rather separate duties, which is a very important concept in security called separation of duties. And also the second thing that you're able to do is your roles are granular and very specific, and therefore you can assign multiple roles to a particular person if it is required. If that is what the single person is doing all those things, then you can assign multiple roles. It's a little bit of overhead in terms of creating multiple roles and assigning it to it, but it is very scalable and it is very secure. The moment you are growing, most startups and small businesses, before you blink, you will start growing and you will not even realize that. And therefore, trying to do these kind of good practices from the beginning would always help you scale correctly. So create roles and then provide the access control to that specific role. So as I explained to you, so there will be a person A who is assigned a particular role, and then for that role they have some specific access control. They can access this particular servers or these particular files. So that's how it will work. The other thing that I strongly recommend is using password managers. So you might be thinking, so what if the password manager, we hear password managers being hacked all the time. So is it really a good idea? Yes, password managers do get hacked all the time. Almost everybody has got hacked, but still, it's a good thing, because it's very easy to rather than we all of us are humans. As humans, we have a bad practice of reusing passwords, because keeping complex passwords and remembering them, and having multiple passwords of complexity of 8 characters with special characters, not everybody will have the capability to manage those many passwords. It's realistically not possible. So that is where I am recommending password managers. Even if the passwords, so you could do a simple thing like just have a extension in your browser and use the password manager extension within your browser. So that information will not be synchronized with the servers, and therefore, even if something happens at your level, at your browser, only those specific passwords are, it's not getting hit at a centralized server level, or vice versa. So, and also the ability to quickly change the password without affecting your remaining passwords also is protected. So overall, I would still recommend using password managers to take care of the other realistically. From a reality perspective, there are too many challenges, and therefore, from that perspective, I still recommend password managers. The second thing, I think lots of blogs and other documents talk about this particular thing, so I don't want to spend too much of time on it, which is the second factor. So already, many banks and critical information services would enforce you to have a second factor authentication, and within organizations, whichever service requires a privileged activity, definitely recommend a factor. So like an OTP or a hardware token, or a YubiKey kind of token, depending on the complexity and integrity, importance of that information that you're trying to protect. So we can move on to the next slide, please. Email security. So this is a little technical, so I don't want to dwell too much into it. So there are a few easy ways by which sending emails, receiving emails, and even if despite the receiving email techniques, if there is something still comes in, what kind of actions you want to take to see whether they should be into quarantine, want to allow it to somebody's inbox, or you just want to completely block it, can be defined. And those kind of techniques are there. Very simple, very easy, and this can be configured irrespective of your hosting your own email server, or it is on hosted service like G Suite, Gmail, or Zoho, or Microsoft 365. You could set these things, and then you can take care of your email security. So these are some techniques that are available, and if it is a little complex for you, we can definitely help you with that. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So we have spoken about a bunch of things right now. So first thing was network security. I'm sorry, we have spoken a lot of things. We have not spoken about network security. So let's talk a little bit about how to protect the network. So this is a typical, I'm sorry if this is not very legible, if it's not really readable, but the main point I wanted to explain and for you to understand is typically what happens is there is internet, and then there is a firewall, and then there is access points from which you get wireless access, and then there could be a redundant firewall from where there is a DMZ. DMZ is a demilitarized zone where you have public facing servers. So, and then you have the other networks where you will have your laptops, desktop printers, and so on and so forth, your phones, and so on and so forth. So this is how a typical corporate network would be protected. Now, this is sounds in theory sounds great, right? And this is the way to protect your network assets. But for small businesses and startups, this is not how they are arranged. Typically there will be no DMZ, and as we said right in the beginning of the presentation, your workforce is highly spread out. Your assets are also highly spread out. It's not like you just go to the internet. We are assuming that everything is internally protected. No, it's either here or here, all our data, but it's rarely the case. We will go out to the internet to access our critical data. So if we can just click one more time, please. So what is required for the future? So this is old concept or for the enterprises. So this is no more relevant. So for the future, what we need is we have to apply a concept called zero trust. So where we are checking the person, as we said, it's a global workforce. It's at least it's a distributed workforce, and because of which we don't know from which device the person is logging. They could be on vacation. They could be logging in from a different network. Somewhere in some Yosemite, inside a particular you know. Vacation spot, they could be logging into a access point and they could be accessing the corporate network, or they could be using a new mobile, a borrowed mobile, to access something very critical. So it could be a stolen device, it could be a genuine request. So you have to know that the person who is logging in is genuine. You have to know that the device used is really something that we can trust. The network from which the person is coming also is known or identifiable. Last but not the least, do they have access to the applications or the resources that he or she is trying to access on the cloud? Again, that is also something that needs to be verified. So this concept is called a zero trust concept. So you have to check on every aspect before you give them access to any of these things and any of the critical company resources, and therefore you can fairly sure that this is somebody that I can trust. And there is always the concept that if you still believe that there is something wrong, you always have the option to the IT administrator could just call up that person and say that, hey, I'm seeing a suspicious login. Are you really trying to log in from this? Right? So you have so many other possibilities by which you could trust. But from an automation perspective, this zero trust methodology would work wonders. So this is what is highly recommended for startups and small businesses, given the nature of the business and how it's evolving with respect to the pandemic, or in general how the entire workforce distribution is happening. So we can move on to the next slide, please. I think this is the last one in terms of what needs to be secured. We probably must have heard the term called OWASP, which is an organization which comes out with these top 10 security threats for applications. So if you are a product organization, or if you're having in-house applications built for your own purposes, then it is typically a very good idea to make sure that you have an auditor check whether your applications are absolutely secure, particularly at least with these top 10 issues, and that you need to be sure that none of those top 10 issues are there with respect to your applications. Similarly, there are other standards. Excuse me. There's something called SANS, and they have their top 25 CWE. You could do that. And there is also NIST standard called SP 853, but this standard is a little bit more stringent and difficult to implement for smaller organizations. So unless you're working with the government, DoD, or you want to become a supplier to the government, this might not be necessarily required, the NIST standards. One of these two should be more than sufficient. I would recommend the OWASP top 10 as one of the good standards. Also, you might want to keep in mind, depending on the industry in which you're working. So if you are working in the healthcare industry, you have to be HIPAA compliant, and 9 out of 10 times you're already aware that you have to do these things. But if you are diversifying to Europe, you also have to make sure that there's GDPR data regulations that you need to be taking care of. And similarly, if you're taking, you're building your own payment mechanisms. So if you are just integrating with the payment gateway, you don't need to do this. But if you are implementing your own payment mechanisms, which is equivalent of a payment gateway, then you would have to be implementing the PCI DSS standards also. So those are the key standards that I wanted to touch upon. You can move on to the next slide, please. As we said right in the beginning, So this is not a defense mechanism. So whatever we have spoken until now is about defense. We touched upon this earlier, that it is not a defense mechanism, and it is primarily a mitigation strategy. So what do? You define a backup periodicity. What is whatever is good for your organization, whether it is 1 day, 1 week, or it is like 1 month. That's up to you. But you have to have a defined backup periodicity clear in your mind, or defined as a policy, and then you keep backing up your data, critical data, according to that policy. Now, how do you back up? So there is something called a 3-2-1 rule. So the 3-2-1 rule says that you have to have 3 copies of the backup, right? And you have to have it on 2 different kinds of media. So if you have it one on a hard drive, physical hard drive, you have it, then the second media type should be something other than a hard drive. So it could be a DVD, it could be tapes, it could be something else, or it could be on the cloud. So there should be at least 2 different types of media. One, the last one stands for that it has to be in a remote location. So out of these 3 backups, at least one backup has to be really far away from where that original data resides. So, for example, you are headquartered in New York. You want to make sure that your backup is in California or somewhere else, very far away, maybe like South Dakota, California, somewhere, something like that. So, so that way you are geographically spreading yourself from these kind of risks. So, God forbid, some calamity, natural calamity happens, and there's a fire accident, and the hard drive goes bust, then at least you have a backup in California which you could recover from. And so that's the whole idea of the 3-2-1 concept. So I'll repeat that one more time. So it's 3 copies, 2 types of media, and 1 copy somewhere very far away. So, and people do take backups. They do it very often. They do it periodically, or they automate that, which is all a great thing. But one of the things that typically where organizations fail is when it comes to verifying the backup. So what do we mean by verifying it? You have to check whether the backup is really existing in a proper condition, right? So if a ransomware hits us, the organization, can I quickly recover from that is something that I absolutely need to be sure about. So unless I verify that all the backup, the first chunk of data up to the last chunk of data, is really saved correctly, I can't assume that everything is okay. I did a backup, I ran a backup, I was supposed to do it like every week, I ran it on Friday, I think we're all good. No, you have to verify that the backup is working correctly. Maybe you don't have to do it every week, but at least define a periodicity even for the verification of the backup. So these are the key essential points that I wanted to talk about. I believe I do not have more slides. Can we just go further? Oh, sorry, I completely forgot. So very interesting. The graph that you see on the right-hand side is about the number of zero-day exploits that are happening in that happened in 2021. So you see like a really steep bar in 2021, which means that all the hackers were very active during COVID time, and or rather towards the end of COVID, and they started exploiting all the systems, all the vulnerabilities, all the gaps that all our organizations were working remotely to exploit, and they started creating zero-day vulnerabilities. So very quickly, what's a zero-day vulnerability? So if you have an antivirus solution, if you have a firewall, these typical devices will look for a known way to detect a particular virus, a known way to identify that this is an issue, this is a typical this is a traffic that I should not trust. So there are ways to identify that this is bad. But what if there is something newly created just now, like in the last 1 hour, and the hackers are created a network, and then they are spreading it like mad all over the world. So that's called a zero-day exploit, an exploit which is created, which no security organization in the world is aware of, and then that is infecting the systems. So as you can see, these many zero-day exploits where people were not aware that this kind of a malware or this kind of a vulnerability existed, uh, rose very, very, very high. And this is going to continue. This is not a one-off thing, right? With the dark web and the kind of decentralization that's happening, this is going to continue. This is not just 1 year that it happened, but this is definitely a trend that's going to continue. So what can we do about it? That's where the continuous monitoring is going to help, right? So I would have seen in movies, not just one movies, in many movies, people sitting like this and watching large monitors to see, all the different kinds of traffic, what's happening. Some alert comes, and then that somebody has logged to a particular machine. That's exactly what we need for. Sounds very fancy, sounds a little too technical or a little too savvy, but this can be simplified. This can be made very easy, abstracting you of all the complexity. There are lots of organizations in the world which can provide this as a service for you, and they will look at your device, they will look at your network traffic, they will look at your databases, they will look at your users activities. They'll also correlate all of this data together, not just look at all these information in silos, but they will also try to correlate this and then also alert you if there is some suspicious activity happening, to confirm what do you want to do, what kind of next action do you want to take. So there are multiple steps even in this. So there is somebody watching all the time, and they could just send it as a ticket to your system, and you could take an action. So there could be a pager, it could be an email, it could be a text message, it could be anything. And then your IT administrator, your CTO takes further action in terms of what needs to be done. So that's one way. Another way is you sign a contract with that company, and they have the necessary instructions for the basic ones in terms of what needs to be done, and the first line of defense comes from them. And then for the more complex ones, they would get back in touch with you to ask for the next steps in terms of what needs to be done. So this is called continuous monitoring, and very, very highly recommended for all organizations, irrespective of the size, primarily because of the continuous rise of the zero-day exploits that are happening in the recent years. So I think that's about continuous monitoring. Yeah, I think this is the last one, and we can start taking questions after this. It's about awareness, right? So organizations spend some amount of resource and time on training their employees and their workforce in terms of what good cybersecurity practices are, but I think this is a never-ending game, right? So you have to remember, in cybersecurity, one of the two key concepts is weakest link. And unfortunately, whether we like it or not, the people are the weakest link, right? So a hacker needs to just identify one small, you could be doing 10 different things extremely well. They need to identify just one thing that you are doing incorrectly, and that is all they need to penetrate into your network. So you have to remember, one unassuming employee just clicks on a phishing link, and lots of things could be compromised within your network. So what do you do? How do you protect against these kind of threats? Again, this is not a defense mechanism; it's a mitigation strategy. So there are softwares which will train employees where you get phishing mails, and then the employees are asked to click on it to see how good they are in identifying phishing or phishing mails, and therefore before getting exposed to real phishing mails. So that's one possibility. The second possibility is training them on social engineering. Again, smaller organizations are a little lax when it comes to shoulder surfing, tailgating, which basically means that you open the door, you let somebody in, you don't ask who you are. It could be, you're trying to be nice to that person. You absolutely have to be nice to the person, but you also have to verify that the person is not having any kind of malintent. So somebody could be standing over our shoulders and be able, looking at our passwords. We just step away from our desk. People have access certain things. So these kind of social engineering attacks are very, very common. Somebody calls. Now it's getting more complicated with AI coming into the picture. So somebody could be calling in and saying that, hey Kathy, I am Ron, the CFO of the company, and I want you to transfer this amount. I'm really stuck here. Please transfer this amount to this particular account. He's our partner, right? Sounds exactly like Ron, the CFO, but it turns out that it was actually a fake voice, which has made sound exactly like the CFO, and poor Kathy is taken for a ride. So always have to verify, have to call back on the same number, Ron's number, check whether he really initiated the call, even if it sounds exactly like him. Text him, WhatsApp, whatever, verify, and then only further action needs to be taken. So these kind of social engineering attacks, people have to be trained in terms of what are the different possibilities are there. Similarly, on the wireless stuff, people can very easily make mistakes. How to protect themselves from these kind of vulnerabilities also is something that people can be trained upon, and therefore protect your assets. So, as I said, this was the last thing that I had from uh, uh, my end. And by doing whatever we have said so far, we will be able to cover all the top 10 common attack vectors, like weak passwords, malicious employees, poor encryption. I don't have to read each of them, but all these top attacks you would be able to take care. And that is where these 10 steps, it's not a one-to-one mapping. It's coincidentally, this is 10, and my framework also talks about 10, but it's not a one-to-one mapping, but it takes care of all these top attacks. So that's it from my end. So I would, Ron, if you could please just go back to one slide, the previous slide, please. Yeah. So in terms of when do you need to, so you might be thinking, do I need to take help immediately? I didn't understand quite a bit of, what was happening in this presentation, or I understand, but I don't know how to implement. So it could be a combination of both. So I also put in a slide for you to know, right, in terms of when to seek help. So either if you have limited capabilities or expertise, you understand, but you might not be able to implement it yourself, or you might be having time constraint, or you need a second pair of eyes to take care and really verify that you have done the right things. You implemented it, but you really need verification from a third party. So in all those cases, we can step in and we can help you with that. And I'm just going to type in the email ID that you can contact us if you need any help. The chat window also, just in case, the email IDs are already on the slide. It's sales at the rate cybersafehaven and enquiry at the rate cybersafehaven.com. And
All right. Thank you.
there's also 20% off if you contact us within the next 2 weeks. Sorry, Ron, you were about to say something.
No, I'm just saying that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Again, as Ramki mentioned, if you would like to reach him directly, his email address is here, and please feel free to email him if you have any other questions about the presentation. But then, as I mentioned earlier, this presentation will be available in our YouTube channel. Please check it in the next 24 to 48 hours if you want to listen to the presentation again. We're open for question right now. We still have a few minutes. If you have any questions, just please feel free to type in your questions on the comment section here. So Ramki can answer the question right now.
Absolutely.
While we are waiting for for questions, I would like to invite you guys. If you are not yet a member of International Trade Council, please approach us, email us directly, and we'll definitely help you to become a member so that you can enjoy the benefits of being a member of International Trade Council. Of course, Ramke is a member of International Trade Council, so I'll be happy to help you guys. So it seems that everything. Okay, there's a question here. For a small company, what kind of data we should back up periodically?
Yes. So for a small company, again, your financial information would be the first thing that you might want to secure. Like for example, your account books. If there is a cloud-based service that you have taken, you have to ensure with your service provider that that's a backup happening on a periodic basis. And similarly, if there are you are also having design documents. If you have internal documents, you have to understand, you would know best in terms of what kind of internal critical documents that you have. It could be something which is work in progress, which is completed, which is intellectual property. So all this kind of data would have to be backed up on a periodic basis. If you have project plans, obviously that needs to be backed up on a periodic basis. You have contracts, agreements. Again, that is something that you would definitely want to make sure that your budgets, your sales budgets, your agreements, all these data are critical to your functioning of the business, right? So you want to know what's your projection for the next quarter. You suddenly lose, you don't want to be starting all over again, trying to create that document. You're going to lose quite a bit of time and also perspective from which you might have put in a lot of effort in creating that document. So you don't want to lose that. So you definitely have to make a list from each function. Let's say, even if it's a small company, there are function heads. So sales and marketing function head is there, finance head is there, the CEO is there. So all heads, function heads can come together and say that these are the important documents from each of these functions, and these are the documents that I want to create. So that can be a list can be collated, and then that can be periodically backed up. So you have a list which is coming from all departments, and you're not trying to create the list by yourself. Hope that makes sense.
All right, thank you. Yes, we're still open for another question. Please feel free to type in your questions here in the comment section. Okay, one question here. In this case, let's say contracts, what's the tool we can use to meet security requirements?
So there are lots of tools that are available in the market where you can. There are, I mean, just to name a specific tool. There's something called, one of the top vendors in the market is called Acronis, who can back up the entire endpoint as a service. So which means that when I say endpoint, your entire laptop, so you can just say that these are the specific folders. I put all the critical data in a particular server or in a particular laptop. So from each of the laptops, I just keep one folder where all the data needs to be backed up. And this service provider will make sure that that data is backed up on a periodic basis. Again, what is to be the periodicity? You define that. You can take a call. You know best about your business, whether it should be weekly or it should be monthly. And they will back it up accordingly.
All right, perfect. I think we're all good. Okay, one last question here. Do you think cloud storage is secure enough?
Cloud storage is definitely secure. I mean, I'm hesitating because I'm trying to provide a qualified answer. So the cloud providers will go, yes, Google Drive, OneDrive are all safe, not safe by themselves, right? So what you have to do is you have to protect, you have to provide additional layer of security, like we talked about two-factor authentication. So if there is a lot of critical data in one single folder, you definitely, and 5 people have access to that folder, all those 5 people definitely should be having second factor authentication, which means that they have to do they have to provide an OTP, they have to provide some other way to authenticate themselves, and only then they will be able to access that information. So it is not secure by default. So you have to be sure that you are taking additional precautions, so that the service providers will definitely ensure from their end. But if there are gaps from our end, which is going to lead, we cannot go back to the service provider and say that how did you let it be leaked? We cannot hold the service provider responsible. So we have to take additional measures or precautions from our end also, because most cloud providers would be saying that there is a shared security responsibility. So from their end, they would be saying that they have taken all the precautions. But from our end, we also have to be doing the second factor or other types of security mechanisms to make sure that it is really protected well.
All right. Perfect. I think yes. I think it's 20%. Yeah, 20% according to him. So okay. So that's a very interesting topic and conversation about about the what we discussed today.
Yeah.
As much as we want to continue it, but we don't have enough time, I highly recommend, guys, if you have any other questions with Ramki, please feel free to email him, possibly for scheduled call if you have any other questions. So thank you, guys, for attending today's webinar. Thank you for your time. It's a very informative presentation. So before we leave, any parting message, Ramki, to the attendees?
Yes, I would like to thank every participant. Unfortunately, I think a few of them might have left. I would like to really sincerely thank each one of you for taking the time to hear me out, and hope you got some value out of this presentation. And as we have discussed already, please feel free to get in touch with us if you need any kind of help with respect to securing your digital assets. We'll be more than happy to provide those services.
All right. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
that.
so much.
Thank you so much for that, Ramki. And again, thank you for your time. You all have a good day, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next webinars. Have a good day, guys. Bye bye.
Good day. Thank you. Bye.